Hey there, dreamers. You hearing me?
So let's talk episodic lore, let's talk pirate radio, let's talk Warframe adding a whole new pillar to their game and then later removing one of its most intriguing features. This of course was the original Nightwave, not just do your chores and get your treats, it was do your chores, get your treats, and also here's a weekly episode with a story that will bleed into the origin system and occasionally punch you in the nose mid-mission. And that's the core difference right up front. From modern Nightwave right now, which is a checklist with a track that kind of works just in the background, and the old Nightwave, which was a checklist with a narrative spin, with voice acting, with bespoke seasonal mechanics, and a little invasion of your normal gameplay. It made Warframe feel alive, more reactive, more like there's stuff happening in the solar system right now, instead of just kill 30 Xmas units and get yourself some points. But we know it wasn't sustainable, so it had to go so that the game could flourish. So 3 storied Nightwaves, 3 seasons, 3 doors into the weird, a diorama, a cult, and of course a moral mystery where the victims were all turned into glass, but each one ending with the exact same question. Why did this stop? Now, before Nora Knight ever started whispering sweet dreamers into our ears, Warframe's daily goals were basically just alerts, outside of farming for of course prime parts, and the alerts by themselves were honestly just dull. They popped up at random times and they vanished just as quick. You could log on and be told by your friends or clanmates that you've just missed an alert for an item that you were really looking forward to getting your hands on, whether it was a Vauban part, whether it was Nightain, but now it's gone. So DE implemented Nightwave, and the pitch was pretty simple. It was going to be a predictable structure, it was going to be seasonal items, but it was also going to be a way for you to target stuff that used to be time-gated behind some of those alerts. So the new loop would basically be you doing your weekly acts and getting your standing. You would increase your seasonal rank, you would get some of the currency that you could then spend in Nora's store, and it was going to add quality of life to the game's structure, and that alone was already a massive shift to the game's system. So when DE then turned around and said, but what if we also added a story? That's where the old episodic Nightwave lived, in the gaps between major updates, like a mini season that gave the origin system some extra texture, extra meat, without needing a full-on cinematic quest to be added to it. Now, Nightwave Season 1 kicked off in early 2019, right in that window before Kuvalich's, before Railjack, before Scarlet Spear event was added, basically before things took just a little bit of a turn, bit of a speed bump, but Nora came online, pirate radio host energy at the maximum, and the headline that she gave was she was broadcasting that a maximum security Grenier prison called Saturn 6 has had a breakout, and an inmate called the Wolf has escaped along with a pack of fugitives, but he is broadcasting a message. He is hunting the warden, he is out there somewhere, and we might just accidentally run into him. Now, the genius of Season 1 isn't that it wasn't just lore text on the screen, it wasn't just a codex entry, it wasn't just a button that you would click on the menu, it was an episodic weekly radio drama that would drop through Nora's broadcast, and the season would then crawl out of the UI into your actual missions, because the wolf didn't just exist as the story, he existed in the system that you were running your missions as an actual problem. You would load into a normal mission. It could be a quick capture mission that's normally going to take you 30-40 seconds, and that quick capture mission would then become a 10-minute battle of attrition against the wolf, who would show up as an actual assassin target like the Stalker in your missions, except instead of politely being a little bit of a skill check, he was a moving brick wall with a hammer, and vengeance like Baba Yaga with a pencil, except that pencil was a spinning hammer, and that hammer was sometimes going to smash you clean in the face. This is what made the old Nightwave feel alive. It wasn't just progress the seasonal track It was progress the seasonal track while enemies spawn into your missions, but also a boss can spawn into your mission and dropkick you into open space. Now, the community, for most part, the mood around this time was that people really liked that new structure. It was predictable progression with items that you could actually target, but then you also had the wolf to contend with himself. Some players loved him as a surprise boss showing up, others hated him showing up when they weren't really modded or built to battle him, especially in lower level content, because he wasn't really tuned for that type of content. He was incredibly tanky, incredibly disruptive, and he had the combat pacing of a fridge falling down the stairs with extra steps. But he was a fridge you had to fight, and if, like a lot of people in Warframe, you're a collector, then you had to fight him if you wanted to get his wolf sledge parts, his hammer. And naturally, that was the only way you could get his hammer at that time. The discourse around this was quite loud because it was a random event having him spawn into your mission, and players would basically have to kill him maybe 20 times to get all of those wolf sledge parts. However, you had to get him to show up in the missions first. Now, this is where DE changed things a little bit towards the end of the season. The final episode was a Wolf of Saturn 6 showdown, which ran as tactical alerts with 2 different brackets. These were a way to, I guess, guarantee the actual fight with the wolf and a better way for us to farm his wolf sledge parts and get those hammer pieces, and it felt like it was a good way to end the season. Now, season 1 ended, the wolf faded out, but he would later, of course, return to the game in different missions, like Carl, and Nora would go quiet, and the next story for Nightwave wasn't about a man, it wasn't about, I guess, a prisoner escaping and terrorizing the solar system, it was about a miracle. So when Series 2 of Nightwave dropped, there was the immediate sense of the tone being flipped. Instead of an escaped monster that might invade your missions, there was hope. We were told hope had arrived and you should maybe just be a little bit suspicious of it. Nora's Nightwave, her new broadcast, followed the story of Arlo, and they framed him as a childlike healer figure with faith and devotion and the idea that maybe the solar system could be actually saved. Warframe players, being Warframe players, immediately thought, hold on a minute, absolutely not. This is a scam, something doesn't feel right here, and it's going to end up being horrific. Because it was. In the Origin system, nothing really nice happens without something horrific hiding underneath the sheets, and that's exactly what made this, I guess, Nightwave land. It was about the infestation, and it was kind of trying to package it as faith, devotion and cult branding, but underneath we knew that there was a screaming biomass just waiting to devour us all. Now, Series 2 is also where DE decided to streamline a lot of the friction from Series 1 of the Nightwave, so this one had catch-up mechanics so that there was no actual real fear of missing out. It also had less grind intensity, and they tweaked some of the acts from the previous season to make the entire thing just run a lot smoother. As a system, it played much better for a lot of people. Same foundation, just less rough edges. Now, the season spilled into the game as well, a little bit like the Wolf did. There was outbreaks, there was derelict missions, and of course, there was the Zealot at the end of it. This is where the season really started to shine. There was outbreaks paired with special missions, hovering near planets like a bad omen, and to access them, you needed to run special missions to get Zealot codes, like 3 outbreak missions on affected planets, and DE basically kept these outbreaks running constantly on a couple of planets so that the loop was always there for us. And on top of that, you would also get these special enemies that would spawn into normal missions so that your regular gameplay got infected by the season, and it felt like it was part of one big event. Now, the sentiment from the community with this one was a lot of people really enjoyed it. They thought it was cool. Nightwave felt like an actual event, and other people thought, why do we need to do 3 chores just to unlock another chore that would then unlock the story? But the culmination of that story was, of course, the thing that actually stuck within Warframe, and that is the Zealoid Prelate. This wasn't just the end of the story, it was a proper boss encounter tied to the seasonal theme, and it came with a big chase and of course a lot of darkness and of course that lantern, and crucially DE also told us that this mysterious encounter would then return as a permanent boss once the Nightwave actually ended, of course at a later date. And that's pretty much the old Nightwave in a nutshell. Limited time season framing, but occasionally leaving behind a boss or something that would give you a weapon later on for you to farm down the road. So the cult story ended, the system of course survived, the infested was pushed away, and out of those 3 episodic Nightwaves, this one was probably the least memorable for me, myself personally, but Nora faded away once again, and then she would come back with a crime scene. Now, Nightwave Series 3 launched in May 2020, and it was arguably the most memorable of the 3 because it did something that I guess looked completely out of place within Warframe. It wasn't about space ninjas anymore, it was about a noir detective mystery hosted by of course Nora Knight on her pirate radio show, and the killer is going around turning enemies into glass. So Nora was on the mic, bodies are showing up vitrified, the killer is especially theatrical, and us, the overpowered space blenders, are about to go investigate. And DE of course didn't half-ass this either, because Glassmaker didn't just give you radio lore, it gave you the actual crime scene, a diorama to jump into each week or with each new episode to investigate, which felt really out of place at the time, and some of the clues were annoying to find, but you would walk around these investigation scenes really slowly and try and find these clues to piece together that bit of the story. And a lot of people didn't see the reason as to why these were part of the season. After you proved that you were actually paying attention, the episode would kick you into this mini kind of memory weave where you would have to jump from platform to platform and get the memory segment correct in the right order and prove that you were actually able to do your homework. So if you had a bad memory, you were going to absolutely suck at this, but somehow it kind of worked. Even though I think halfway through week 2 or episode 2 of this Nora Nightwave, Nora herself hinted and told us who the actual killer was.
Nihil. Worse than an execution. Worse even than an excruciator. When my tired old grandma didn't have time for my nonsense, Nihil was the boogeyman she said was gonna come put naughty Nora in a bottle.
But the season's unique loop had 2 main moving parts: the investigation themselves, with new episodes, new scenes to investigate, new clues, and of course a new memory weave. And then there was, I guess, the gating resource, which was the cephalite resonance earned from special enemies that would spawn into regular missions where enemies would get vitrified and turned into cephalites. You would then crack the glass, you would kill them, and then you would hope that some of that cephalite resonance would actually drop from them. So the vibe became CSI Warframe, except you're also sprinting through capture missions hoping to get some of that cephalite resonance. And story-wise, the big reveal, of course, was that the Glassmaker was Nihil, a Norokan judge with a Norokan idea of justice, and he was basically judge, jury, and executioner, meaning eternal punishment and superiority. In his mind, he was better than everyone, and a boss fight at the end that had plenty of jumping platforms and a big-ass sword that would slam down on your head, destroying some of those platforms and maybe kill you instantly. Now the lore, if I remember correctly, had tie-ins to the origin of cephalons, which is one of the darkest lore points of Warframe and how they are made. But the sentiment for this series within the Warframe community was also a very mixed one, and not because it was a bad idea. People absolutely loved the idea of DE doing something outside of what we were used to, something that didn't really feel like it belonged in the universe, but it was also something new. It was unusual, but they didn't like the drip-fed pacing, they didn't like the fact that the resonance grind was quite extensive, and they also really didn't like the length of this series of Nightwave, because the funny part is this Nightwave season ran from May 2020 until January 2021, which isn't really a season, that's a feckin' tenancy agreement. So it was originally supposed to be a 2-month event, and instead it turned into 8, almost 9 months, which completely sapped the enjoyment out of it. So like I said, the season ended in the most typical Nightwave way possible, and that is with a Nihil boss fight, and beating him of course got you the Vitrica 2-handed sword blueprint, and also Nihil's oubliette as a reward. Now, the question I asked at the start of this whole video is, why did this stop? And here's where I guess the nostalgia hits the wall to reality. Old Nightwave wasn't just write a few lore bits and have Nora read them out. It was a mini season with writing, with voiceover recordings, with audio production, with real pacing, and with new mechanics, seasonal mechanics added into the game that had to work across the entire game. So if something would break, and it would more often than not, then it would break other parts of the game as well. So Series 1 had the wolf roaming into missions like some kind of seasonal assassin. Series 2 had outbreaks, it had the derelict codes, it had zealots, and it had that boss pipeline that needed permanence in the game once the season ended. Season 3 had the crime scene, the memory weaves, the vitrified spawns, resources that you had to farm, and of course that bespoke final boss at the end of the season that would give you the new sword. And while those seasons were live, they needed constant hotfixing, constant balance passes, UI fixes, pacing adjustments, the whole live service threadmill, which means in practice Nightwave wasn't just content, it was live service inside of a live service. So after Glassmaker, the dominoes really started to show because it took so long to finish that one Nightwave season, so DE decided to talk a little bit about Nightwave going under construction, and how it was time for them to change the scope and I guess the pace of future Nightwaves. These episodic adventures were pulling developers away from mainline quests and of course major updates. Warframe is always balancing priorities. Do you ship a cool seasonal narrative side dish, or do you ship the main course expansion that people have always been asking for? So in 2022, DE made it official with Nora's Mix, a version of Nightwave that was closer in scope to the old Nightwave intermissions than what it was to the episodic Nightwaves, and that's where they made the compromise. There was going to be less drama on the radio, more dev time for future releases and mainline updates, and while the new series of Nightwave was of course less exciting, it was more sustainable and it would run quietly in the background. It didn't demand a mini quest every time the new season dropped, and it would free DE up to the point where it allowed them to make, I guess, work on the big narrative beats and the big narrative expansions instead of building and maintaining a season on the side by dragging developers away from whatever else they should have been working on. So in the end, we lost Nora Knight running her own episodic TV series where we were invaded in missions, but we got a Nightwave that can run as an evergreen system while DE would be focused on those cinematic updates. And honestly, if you were there for the old Nightwaves, then you remember what they felt like. You remember that they weren't just acts, they were do acts and watch the story unfold, and also somewhere out there in the solar system a lunatic might smash your back doors in. And that's where the old episodic Nightwave used to be. 3 seasons, 3 experiments, a diorama, a cult, a modern mystery made of glass, and a pirate radio host tying it all together like the Origin system was her little personal late night show. Now I guess the best way to end this video is by asking the only question, and that is, were they worth losing? Let me know in the comment section below. If you were there during the old Nightwaves, then what did you like, what did you not like, what was your favourite? Have a great day either way, have a great week, and as always, thanks for watching.